Thank you for joining us. I'm Toke Eid, the director of the Keynes Fund in Cambridge, and my guest today is Professor Andrew Harvey. We're here to talk about your new Keynes Fund project, Persistence and Forecasting in Climate and Environmental Econometrics.
The project is looking at time series, and it's examining time series which have a trend. Now, econometricians and economists have spent a lot of time in the last 20 or 30 years analysing the statistical properties of trending time series. And they've been particularly interested in the question of whether these series move together and how one would analyse whether they're moving together and what those movements are. Now, in recent years, econometricians have started to become interested in other areas, for example, climate and environment. And it turns out that many of the problems that we've looked at in economics actually turn up in these other subjects. But the researchers in those other subjects often haven't used the tools that we've developed, not surprisingly. So we think we can bring some of those tools to bear on some of these problems in environment and climate. Of course, at the same time, the problems that we're facing there are somewhat different from the ones in economics. So in particular, what we're interested in is when two trending series move together, they may not, in fact, be what economists call co-integrated, which means they're very tightly linked together. But they're undoubtedly moving together. So we want to, on the theoretical side, develop our econometric tools to deal with that kind of situation. So that's one aspect of the work. The other aspect is the much more applied aspect, which is applying these techniques that we already have and which we're now developing as well to various problems in climate and environment.
What are you looking at that hasn't been addressed before in the project?
From the theoretical point of view, we're looking at the issue of trending time series which are close to being co-integrated, but not exactly co-integrated. We'll also be looking at a lot of applied problems that people haven't addressed.
What does it mean that something is near co-integrated?
An example would be income and consumption. They cannot move too far apart. So they can move apart in the short term, but not in the long term. If we look at something in climate, such as global temperatures and greenhouse gases, those move together. They're both, of course, going up, but they're not necessarily co-integrated, but they are closely related. So we need to adapt our tools to deal with that kind of situation.
How is this approach new?
It's going to be new from the econometric side in that it's dealing with series which are close to co-integration, but not exactly co-integrated. So we're hoping to make theoretical developments there. So that's one thing that's new. The other thing is the way in which we're applying econometric tools to these other areas.
What are the wider social issues that your research addresses?
I think what's interesting is when you start off in a completely new area, you find interesting topics that you hadn't previously even contemplated addressing. So one thing I've been looking at in the last couple of years is modelling the direction of the wind. Now, why does this come in? Well, economists are interested in this, of course, because of wind power. But from the statistical point of view, it's a very interesting topic because direction is a circular variable, and that's not something we deal with. But it turns out that some of the tools that we've been developing recently to deal with financial econometrics can actually be adapted to tackle this particular problem.
How can your research help us understand more about the economy and society?
I think very, very generally, we're looking at, when we say society, we're looking at the environment, climate, and also, I think, things like infectious diseases. One thing I've got interested in the last few months, like many other people, is how to construct statistical models for coronavirus. And in fact, again, it transpires that some of the techniques I've been using in time series over the years can be adapted to deal with modeling coronavirus and forecasting the path of epidemics in general.
One of the objectives of the Keynes Fund is to strengthen the research base in Cambridge and help younger researchers establish themselves. How does your project help achieve that objective?
My co-worker on this is Jerome Simons, who is currently just finishing off a PhD at Oxford. And he's been doing this work on near cointegration. So I think by joining forces, because we have slightly different perspectives on the topic concerned, I think that's going to be very fruitful. So it'll help him and it'll help us here as well.